Welcome back, everybody! Have you ever wondered how to get better at building in Minecraft? When I first started playing, that was one of the first questions that I had. Since then, I've learned a few things that have helped me get better, and today I'm going to share them with you. Some might be things you've heard before, others will hopefully be new. As we go through, there are going to be references to different types of tools that may be able to help you, and links to all of them are included in the description. While the tools may be useful to speed up the design process, I want to emphasize that they're not required to get better at building. Instead, if you learn how to build first, you can use the tools to supplement and enhance your building process rather than relying on the tools to try to make your builds better. So, let's get started with answering the question, how to get better at building in Minecraft. The first step to improving your building skills is to develop your background knowledge on architectural styles. There are a few different ways to do this. The easiest way is to search for pictures of buildings online. You can also get books on architecture, which will give you more details on styles than can be just found by looking at pictures, or you can study the buildings you see around you. Once you've decided on your source, you should be thinking about a couple of things while studying it. First, look at the proportions to each building. Are they thick and solid or light and delicate? Think about how the building achieves that look. Some might make use of lots of vertical lines or windows to create the impression of a light structure, while solid structure will have few windows and small openings. Notice the different shapes that are used in each section, and think about how color influences how you feel about what you see. There's a significant difference between an Art Deco building and a medieval castle, and once you're able to identify what separates those two types of buildings, then you can start building your own version in Minecraft. You also want to be thinking about scale. Some building styles are easy to achieve at a small scale in Minecraft. Others, particularly very ornate styles, require a much larger scale to achieve. For example, building in a Gothic or Baroque style needs a lot of blocks to do it well. It may be possible to achieve on a small scale, but given the blocks that are available in vanilla Minecraft, it would be very challenging to do. On the other hand, with a larger scale, you will have more room and flexibility to add details. But no amount of studying will help if you can't translate what you imagine into Minecraft, which takes us to the next step of learning how to get better at building in Minecraft: mastering Minecraft's building techniques. Minecraft building techniques can be broken down into 4 general categories: shapes, depth, textures, and gradients. Each of these could probably have their own video because there is a lot to cover. For today, we are going to focus on the basics, starting with shapes. Expanding on the shapes you use when building is an easy way to make a build look more interesting. You've probably seen some version of this outline for a build before. We're not going to focus on that because that can be found in a lot of other videos. What I want to talk about are the types of shapes that you should be practicing. Some shapes are easier than others. Squares, rectangles, and cubes are all pretty easy. This is a block game after all. Where things start to get tricky are with curves and angles. Adding curves and angles can take a boring build and turn it into an interesting build. There are several tools that you can use to know where to place blocks for both curves and angles. For curves, a circle generator can be really helpful when you're first starting out. I've included a link in the description to one that I've used many times. If you have World Edit or Axiom, you can generate circles pretty easily as well. I would recommend practicing how to build circles with diameters of 5 to 21 blocks to start with. Once you're familiar with them, then you can start using them in your projects. Turn a circle into a dome, use a half circle as support for a bridge, or mix and match parts of circles to create a wavy structure, or for a road that winds its way through the countryside. Building something that has a curve or circle makes it a lot more interesting than just having a flat surface. For angles, I also found a tool that can help you with the placement of blocks, and I've included a link in the description to it. Axiom is also pretty helpful for creating them. Angles require a lot of planning to get right. 45-degree angles are pretty easy to achieve in Minecraft. All you have to do is go in a line like this. But for the other angles, well, they take a bit more work. Here we have 15 degrees, 26, 33, 45, 57, 64, and 75. Once you have the placement of blocks down for an angle, the real challenge comes once you start adding in the details. For example, if you're building a house, creating the basic shape is fairly straightforward. You just put a couple of angled lines together and get the shape you want. But what do you do when you want to add in doors or windows or a roof or a planter? There are probably more answers to those questions than we have time for today, but the way that I would generally approach this problem is to focus on how to achieve the desired result on a straight line and then adapting it to fit the angle. If you have a shallow angle, that can be as simple as just placing the blocks you're using in the same way as you would with a straight line. For a steeper angle, it requires a little more finesse. Keep in mind that it will not always be an exact match. A lot of times you will have to settle for an approximation of what it would look like had you not used an angle. But putting in the time to get it right will pay off in the end. One of my favorite things to do with an angle is to put in an accent layer and then add in walls. It helps to emphasize the accent, but it doesn't let it overpower the rest of the build. Once you've got a general shape for your build, then it's time for the next Minecraft building technique, depth. This is a classic example of adding depth to a Minecraft build. with 2 support pillars, some upside down stairs, and maybe some trapdoors or stairs at the bottom. This is a solid technique and I frequently use it, but there are lots of other ways to add depth to a build. One of my favorites, especially if I'm using wood, is to use stairs instead of full blocks to create this wood siding effect. Another favorite is to use stairs, slabs, and walls to create cracks. Then you can put anything behind it to add a bit of spice to the build, like I did with the crying obsidian here. Another favorite is to use a combination of full blocks and walls. The walls can add a more subtle variation of depth. You can either use that to create random sections like I did here, or you can use it to create patterns like I did with this wall. There are really a lot of different ways to add depth to a build. If you have a large flat space, don't leave it that way. Try a couple of different things and see what you like. The third Minecraft building technique is texturing. But what is texturing? Texturing, simply put, is using more than one block type to create variations in color. Some simple examples of texturing are this combination of stone, stone bricks, and cobblestone, or this combination of stone, andesite, and gravel, or this one of dark oak planks, stripped dark oak logs, and brown terracotta. One of my favorites is the use of deep slate bricks, smooth basalt, and mud. There are many different combinations of blocks that can be used. When coming up with a texture, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. First, you want to think about the effect that you're trying to achieve, and second, you want to consider how much contrast you want to have between the blocks. For example, if you're creating a weathered, worn stone structure, you'll want to put in some cracked stone bricks and then have some cobblestone near the cracked stone bricks, and maybe some mossy cobblestone and moss blocks. This will help to create the impression that there's been some stress to that section of the build, which is causing it to start to crumble. And the moss helps to show that this has been happening for a long time. But if you're building a structure that's supposed to be new, then the texturing should be more subtle because it hasn't been exposed to the elements for very long. You don't always need to use different types of blocks for texturing though. There are many blocks that can be placed in different orientations. If you mix and match the orientations, you can create some interesting patterns. For example, you can place polished basalt in alternating orientations to create this wavy pattern, or you can use deep slate in random orientations to get this texture. Texturing is a very powerful tool. It takes a little bit of experimentation to find what you like, but once you have it down, you'll be able to start using it in all of your projects. Which leaves us with the final building technique that we're going to cover, gradients. A gradient is a type of texturing. It's a gradual shift from one color to another. It can be made up of a couple of blocks or a lot of blocks depending on the size of your project. You can go for a high contrast gradient or a more subtle gradient. The challenge is finding the right mix of blocks. I've included a link in the description to an online tool that can help with that, and Axiom also has a built-in gradient tool as well. With either tool though, don't always accept the first option that comes up. Check out the different blocks that are available because sometimes they pick blocks that are impossible to use in survival, like command blocks, or difficult to find, like deep slate coal ore blocks, or really expensive, like netherite blocks. One question that I had when I first started was how to create a gradient. I understood the concept, start with one color and work your way to the next, but just putting them in a row, one after the other, didn't look quite right. Now that I've been using them for a while, I have found some different guidelines to help me achieve the desired look depending on the project. If I'm using them in a large space, I'll start by putting them in layers. Then I go back through and start mixing the lines between layers. When I'm doing this, I'm keeping an eye out to make sure that I don't have any straight lines. It's important that it be a randomized blend. If you can see straight lines, go back and move blocks around. If I'm using them in a small space, then I'm not randomizing the blocks as much. In a smaller space, there is less to see and the lines between colors can blend a bit more. Once you're comfortable using gradients, there are lots of different ways to add them to your projects. I often use them to add a slight gradient at the base or to add colors to a build. But those aren't the only ways to add a gradient. You can use gradients to emphasize shadows or to create depth on an otherwise flat wall. It just depends on what you're trying to create. Shapes, depth, texturing, and gradients are the 4 main Minecraft building techniques. As you get more comfortable with them, you can start to mix and match them to create a complete build. Different shapes can be combined to create a dynamic structure. Depth can be added to create interest. Subtle gradients can give way to textured walls, while color gradients can be added as accents or highlights. But how to do that effectively is the real question. And that takes us to the final topic we're going to cover today, application. Applying what we've covered so far is challenging. It's easy to look at pictures and find something that you like. Putting together shapes or practicing texturing can be done fairly easy as well. Creating a complete structure exactly how you imagined it, that's hard. But I have 5 tips to help you. The first tip is to plan out your builds. Now, there are some mixed opinions about doing that. Some people say using a creative world is cheating, or that they spend all their time planning and never get around to actually building in survival. There are different ways to use a creative world. If you don't want to plan out your projects, then just use the Creative World to practice different building techniques, or see how different textures work, or how to create a good gradient. If you feel like you spend too much time in creative and not enough time actually building in your survival world, then break up your projects. Plan out part, then switch over and build it. Then go back and plan some more, and so on and so on. If you're focused only on building in survival, it can be challenging to test out different ideas, especially if you have a limited amount of time to play. The advantage of a creative world is that you don't need to spend time collecting blocks. You can also just set aside a project if you don't like what you build. You don't have to spend time taking it down. Practicing in creative can also encourage you to try something that you might not otherwise do. The second tip is to balance the different building techniques that we've covered. While you don't want to have a build that looks too flat and boring, you also don't want to add in too much detail or too much depth or too much texturing or too many gradients. You want to find a balance. How to do this depends on your style. I like to manage it by being selective where I use the different building techniques. If I'm using a gradient made out of bright colors, I will limit where I use it so that it doesn't overwhelm the build. If I add a lot of depth in one location, I'll have another be somewhat flat. If I have a lot of texturing in the build, then I will add in bands that have limited to no texturing. If a build has a lot going on, it can make it difficult to enjoy. The third tip is not to limit your use of a block to the function that it serves. Instead, use a block based on how its color or texture can help you achieve your desired result. When I first started building, I avoided using wool blocks. This will sound silly, but I just couldn't imagine using wool, which is primarily used to make fabric, as part of a building. Now I've come to appreciate wool blocks as an important block for adding color to a project. There are lots of other blocks that will not seem like building blocks, but they can be used to build with, such as furnaces, which I added to these garage doors, or using the bottom of smithing tables and daylight sensors, which I added to this ceiling. Once you get past the function of a block, it opens up a lot of possibilities. The fourth tip is to not give up. I can't tell you how many times I've been worried that a build I just started planning looks awful. Sometimes it is truly awful, but other times I've just not worked on it enough and it needs a little something extra to pull it all together. This is also where planning in a creative world can really help. This build that I recently did for my tree farms is the perfect example. It went through several versions before I ended up with this design. Here's the first design. On its own, it's a fine build, but when I started comparing it to the other builds in the city, it didn't quite fit in. At first, I tried adding in more details, which you can see here, but that didn't help. I tried removing the top tower and outer layers, but that also didn't look right. So I switched up the design a bit more and got this monstrosity of a roof before I arrived at the final design. So what is the point in showing all these different versions? The point is to not give up on a build too soon. It may be that the proportions need some tweaking, or some details need to be added in, or maybe it's a matter of switching out the colors. Just don't give up on a project if it doesn't look exactly right on your first attempt. The last tip that I have is related to the previous one, and that is to be patient. Learning to build in Minecraft takes time. Designing a build takes time. Building a build takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. This is the first big build I did in Survival Minecraft. This is my most recent build. There are 8 years of practicing and building between where I started and where I am now, and I am still learning and getting better each time. When you start a new project, try not to compare it to what you've seen others do. Instead, think about how you can use it to improve your previous projects. Maybe try some new texturing techniques or some different gradients, or you can use the project to try different shapes or angles. If you do this with each new project, you will stretch your building skills and continue to grow and improve. If you can't build exactly what you imagined today, don't give up. Instead, focus on getting better with each project, and before you know it, you have improved your building a lot. And that's how you get better at building in Minecraft. We've covered a lot of information today, but I think there's one more piece of advice that I would give. This is probably more important than anything else I have told you today. It is the key that ties everything else together. No matter what you build or how you build, have fun. Minecraft is a game. You should play it because you enjoy it. If you enjoy the process, that will help you more than anything I can say. It's the internal motivation that will keep you coming back over and over. And with that, I think we've covered everything. If you enjoyed today's video, please leave a like. If you want to see more, please subscribe. And until next time, see you later.